If you heard a puppy crying deep in the woods, and the air around it was swarming with hornets, would you walk away, or would you run toward it? Daniel Carter didn't hesitate. That morning, he had just stepped out behind his remote cabin in northern Georgia to gather firewood. The forest was silent, calm, until a high-pitched cry cut through the trees, followed by a low, ominous hum. Since his wife passed away, Daniel had spent most of his days alone. At 68, the quiet routine of chopping wood, fixing things, and drinking coffee on the porch kept him steady, if not exactly happy. He told himself he didn't mind the silence, but sometimes, especially in the early morning, the stillness felt too loud to bear. He thought the sound might be a bird at first, maybe an owl stuck somewhere. But as he stepped closer to the tree line, the buzzing grew louder, heavier. Then he saw it. Something small and golden was twitching on the ground beneath a low bush, almost hidden. As he moved closer, he realized it was a puppy, curled into itself, yelping and completely surrounded by hornets. Daniel froze. The swarm was thick, furious, like a living cloud. He knew hornets, what they could do, how deadly they could be in numbers. His instinct told him to turn back, but the puppy wasn't moving much now. Its cries were weakening, its body shaking violently. He felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time: urgency. The pup looked no older than a few months, maybe a Labrador mix, its fur matted with mud and leaves. He couldn't tell how badly it had been stung, but the eyes were nearly swollen shut, the snout red and blistered. Daniel took a cautious step forward, swatting at the air with his jacket. A hornet stung him on the neck, then another on his arm. It brought back memories he didn't expect. Running into burning buildings, hearing people scream, knowing that seconds mattered. He didn't know whose dog this was or how it ended up in this nightmare, but he knew one thing: no one else was coming. If he turned away, that little life on the forest floor would flicker out. Circling wide, Daniel used the smoke from his burning pile of leaves to drive some of the hornets off. The buzzing thinned slightly, but the danger was still real. He rushed in, yanked off his jacket, and threw it over the puppy as gently as he could. Hornets stung his hands and face, but he didn't stop. He scooped the pup up and bolted back toward the cabin. By the time he reached the porch, he could barely breathe. His face burned, his arms were covered in welts, and the buzzing still echoed in his ears. Inside, he laid the puppy on the kitchen floor, wrapping it in a clean towel. The pup's chest moved in quick, shallow breaths. It was alive, but just barely. Daniel had a first aid kit, but nothing that could undo dozens of stings on a creature that small. The nearest vet was nearly 40 minutes away. He stared at the puppy for a long second, heart racing, unsure if it would survive the drive. Then, the pup let out a low, fragile whimper, not of pain, but of something else. It sounded like trust. Daniel didn't think twice. He grabbed his truck keys, wrapped the puppy tighter in the towel, and placed it gently on the passenger seat. The little body was trembling, its breathing shallow and erratic. As he turned the ignition, he whispered, "Hold on, buddy. I've got you now." The truck roared to life, and the wheels spun gravel as he sped down the dirt road. The closest veterinary clinic was in Jasper, a winding 40-minute drive through back roads and hills. Every bump made the puppy whimper, and Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened with each sound. He glanced at the animal, barely conscious, covered in red welts and tiny puncture marks. His own arms stung from the hornets, but he didn't care. Halfway there, the pup went completely still. No movement, no sound. Panic hit Daniel hard. He reached over with one hand, feeling the tiny chest with his fingers. Faint, but still moving. Relief flooded him, followed by a wave of helpless anger. "Why would anyone leave you out there?" he muttered, voice cracking. "What kind of person does that?" When he arrived at the clinic, the vet techs rushed to the truck as soon as they saw him carrying the limp puppy in. "He's been stung dozens of times," Daniel said, breathless. "Hornets. In the woods. He wasn't gonna make it." The staff moved fast, slipping an oxygen tube over the pup's snout, injecting fluids, applying ointment to the swelling. Daniel stood frozen, hands clenched. The vet, a woman in her 40s named Dr. Henley, came out to speak with him. Her voice was calm, but her face was serious. "It's bad. He's in anaphylactic shock. We've given him epinephrine, but the next few hours are critical." Daniel nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. He could still hear the buzzing, still feel the heat of that moment in the woods. "He's not chipped," she added. No tags, no collar, looks like he's been out there for days. Daniel's stomach turned. That little dog didn't get lost. Someone left him, on purpose, in a place no one would hear him. The thought hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just cruel, it was calculated, and it made his chest tighten with something close to rage. She asked if the dog was his. Daniel hesitated. "He is now," he said. The words came out before he even realized he believed them. He hadn't planned on it. He hadn't had a pet since he was a teenager. But looking into that small, battered face, he knew the truth. He couldn't walk away. Not after this. Not ever. Over the next few hours, Daniel stayed in the waiting room, pacing and rubbing his sore arms. The stings on his own skin throbbed, but he barely noticed. Every time the vet techs walked by, he looked up with hope. Most shook their heads gently, until finally one gave him a small smile. "He's holding on," she said. "He's a fighter." That night, Daniel went home alone, but everything felt different. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy. His hands trembled as he washed the blood from the towel he had used to carry the dog. He didn't know if the pup would survive the night, but he knew something had shifted. He had made a decision, and it had already changed him. The next morning, Daniel was already waiting outside the clinic before sunrise. He didn't need to say his name. One of the techs recognized him immediately and walked him to the back. The puppy lay inside a heated recovery box, hooked up to fluids, his face still swollen but breathing steady. As Daniel stepped closer, the pup lifted his head slightly and opened one swollen eye. Dr. Henley appeared with a cup of coffee in hand. "He made it through the night," she said softly. "Still weak, but he's stable. He's a tough little guy." Daniel exhaled, finally letting out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He pulled up a chair beside the crate and extended a hand. The puppy gave a weak sniff, then let out the smallest wag of his tail. Daniel came back every day after that. His face was still puffy from the hornet stings, but he didn't care. The staff had started calling him the fireman with the puppy, and some even joked that the little dog owed him a debt. But Daniel didn't see himself as a hero. He just knew he couldn't leave that puppy behind, and maybe deep down, he knew the puppy had rescued him too. After a week, Dr. Henley gave him the green light to take the puppy home. They packed up antibiotics, ointments, and a list of instructions. At the cabin, Daniel set up a soft bed near the fireplace. He had no experience caring for a sick animal, but he followed the vet's notes to the letter. Slowly, the puppy started eating, standing, and even playing a little. Daniel named him Dusty for the golden, dirt-covered fur he'd been found in. The name just fit. Dusty followed him everywhere, even with his shaky legs. On the porch, he'd curl up right against Daniel's boots and sigh like he finally belonged. He didn't need to say thank you. It was in every look, every step he took toward healing. One day, the vet called to check in, and Daniel found himself talking for nearly half an hour about Dusty's progress. The small victories, eating solid food, taking a few steps, felt monumental. After hanging up, Daniel realized he hadn't had a real conversation in weeks. The last long call he'd made was to the hospital, the day his wife died. A neighbor from down the road, Earl, a cattle farmer, stopped by unexpectedly. He brought a bag of dog food and a worn leather collar. "Heard you've got a new roommate," he said with a crook grin. Daniel chuckled, a sound that surprised even him. "Guess I do." Word about Dusty was spreading, and neighbors began stopping by with blankets, or just to say hi. One afternoon, while walking slowly through the woods, Dusty veered off the trail and barked at a bush. Daniel rushed over, heart in his throat. But it was just a squirrel. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about it all day. It wasn't the bark itself. It was the first one. Rough, raspy, and finally found his voice. That night, Daniel lit the fireplace and sat down on the floor beside Dusty's bed. The pup rested his head in Daniel's lap, breathing softly. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. There was warmth, movement, hope. Something had changed, not just in the dog, but in him too. Weeks passed, and Daniel and Dusty fell into a rhythm that neither of them had expected. Morning started with Dusty's gentle paw on Daniel's leg, asking for breakfast or a walk. The silence that used to echo through the cabin was now filled with the soft jingle of a collar and the occasional bark at passing deer. For the first time in years, Daniel looked forward to each new day. Dusty had scars, and so did Daniel, not all of them visible, but they began healing together. Daniel would hum while cooking, sometimes even talk to Dusty like he was an old friend. And Dusty would watch his every move, always close by, always alert. There was no drama in their bond, just quiet trust and steady companionship. The change in Daniel didn't go unnoticed. Earl came by more often. A woman from town invited him to bring Dusty to a local senior center for a pet therapy day. Daniel almost declined, but Dusty was already wagging his tail like he knew it was time to go. When they walked into the room, people lit up. Old hands reached out to stroke Dusty's fur, and he soaked up every second. One of the nurses pulled Daniel aside. "You don't know how much they needed this," she said. Daniel looked around the room. The laughter, the eyes filled with light, and he felt something shift again. Dusty wasn't just helping him heal. He was helping others too. That night, Daniel wrote a short post online about Dusty's rescue. He didn't expect what came next. The post spread fast, local papers picked it up, then regional news. People sent messages of thanks, stories of their own animals, offers to donate to the clinic that had saved Dusty. A nearby shelter reached out and asked if Daniel would consider helping with other abandoned animals. He hesitated, then smiled. Maybe he wasn't done saving lives yet. Back home, Daniel made small changes. He cleaned out the room that had been his wife's craft space and turned it into a cozy area for fostering animals. He started with one injured kitten, then another dog. Dusty welcomed them all, gentle and patient. He knew exactly what they needed. In helping them heal, Daniel continued to heal too. But some things never changed. Every evening, Daniel and Dusty sat on the porch together, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Dusty's head would rest on Daniel's knee, and Daniel would stroke his back in silence. No words were needed. They had already spoken the most important ones, through actions, through presence, through love. In town, people started calling Dusty a miracle dog. Daniel would just shake his head and say, "He's just Dusty." But in his heart, he knew better. Dusty had come into his life when he needed it most. Not as a project, not as a pet, but as a partner in grief and in growth. Their meeting wasn't luck. It was something deeper. The hornet stings had long healed, but the day Daniel found Dusty never left him. It reminded him that no matter how deep the pain, how loud the silence, there is always something worth saving, even if it finds you in the unlikeliest way. He didn't just rescue a puppy from a swarm. He rescued himself from a life that had stopped moving. Because in saving Dusty, Daniel hadn't just found a dog. He found a reason to keep going.